How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Today, we're going to be talking about 10 ways manipulative inmates try to coerce staff. A little bit of corrections 101, but I believe that we'll always be able to provide a little extra. So this will be very good for not just our rookie staff, but also our senior staff, and not just our civilian staff, or not just our custody staff, but also our civilian staff. My guests today are going to be Joe Pomponio and Russ Hamilton. I think it's going to be a great dialogue. Again, we're going to be talking about 10 ways manipulative inmates try to coerce staff. But real quick, let me go over my sponsors. First sponsor I have is American Military University. If you guys are looking to get a degree, seek higher education, please check out American Military University. They're developing a lot of programs for our law enforcement professionals, and obviously that does include our correctional staff. So if you guys get a chance, please check out American Military University. It's great if you're able to get your degree and then bring some experience into the classroom, because that's what we need. We also have Inmate Manipulation Decoded. That book is now available, used in training all across the country, and the link to that is in the description. You can get that book on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles. And then we also have my next book coming out, How to Succeed in Corrections, Lessons Learned While Working in Prison. It's being reformatted. Guys, it looks really, really good. It comes out August 31st. The link to that is in the description. If you pre-order it, you will get the app. You will get an ebook as well as that book, which is going to be a nice book to hold in your hand, guys. I'm telling you, it just feels good. And there's just tons of information in that book. Not just for myself, but from other people in the profession. So you guys got to get your hands on that book. This is a book that I wish I had coming in. Everybody that's read it, wish they had it coming into this profession. Guys, it pretty much covers so much. I mean, I literally, I'll go through something at work and I look back and the book has some answers there. It's just a very good, very informative book. Thank you, Blue 360 Media. If you guys get a chance, hit the link up in the description, because there's other books they have there for sale. And I am going to go ahead, and now that I have a publisher, I'll be working on another book. I'll start that in 2023, try to have 2024, try to have that release before the end of the year. And it's going to be 10 tips for rookie staff. So these are tips that I wish I knew going in. All right, let's get our guest on. First, let's get Joe. What's up, Joe?
Hey, what's going on, Anthony?
Joe, you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Absolutely. My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice of 29 years and 6 months. And currently work for our local county sheriff's department in the jail division, and a panel member of Tier Talk.
Yes, and we love having you, Joe. We love having you. And I also got Russ. I just don't want to get him while he's eating. So go ahead, Russ. I'm waiting for you to chew that. He's eating McDonald's, I think.
I'm eating McDonald's, man.
Yeah, I see McDonald's there. I see it. You're
crime fighting fuel. Crime fighting fuel.
Well, Russ, you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Yes, I am one very hungry former CDCR sergeant, retired from California Department of Corrections. I also have time as a senior juvenile correctional officer. I currently work for a company that does reentry and rehabilitation work for a local county jail, and for a probation department where I am a case manager.
Well, it's good having you on, Russ. And how's Keepers of Chaos going?
Keepers of Chaos is going great. Growing, trying to get to that 6,000 mark. We seem a little bit stalled out right now, but we'll fix that in short order. And, if you are a corrections professional, come on by, check it out. We are dedicated exclusively toward helping you do your job better and more safely.
Yeah, platforms like ours, even we have Facebook and YouTube. I mean, it really is intentional. It's people going to the site. You can't expect these platforms to go ahead and promote our material, unfortunately. Sad to say, but true. All right. So, again, the topic here is 10 ways manipulative inmates try to coerce staff. Guys, just want to mention something before we go into the topic. Coercion is just their effort to gain control, whether they're trying to get you to do something or whether they're trying to get you not to do something. So basically, if they're trying to pull you out of that prescribed role. So know that these 10 ways are pretty much ways that inmates try to take the control away from the person who's trying to enforce that rule. So whether it's a frontline professional or a supervisor, just, be very wary of these tactics, because in the end, if you fall into this game, you're literally giving this inmate a level of control over your ability to do your job. So that's something you don't mess with. That's something you need to protect at all costs. All right, so let's get to the first tip. So I'll explain the first tip. I as positions of influence, what I mean by that is kind of job related influence. I'll give you an example. As we move up in this profession, we get promoted. We get more authority over bigger areas. That authority that is given to us, that level of responsibility, is something that we've earned. We got to be very careful who we allow into that light, because what they tend to do is borrow from that light, and then they utilize that to manipulate influence over people that, may be subordinate to that authority figure. I just as an example, if admin has a porter who works with them constantly, and through frequency, they build this rapport, or they interact more than the frontline staff would with admin, that inmate now will foster that connection in an effort to manipulate staff at the front line and not doing their job. I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm an officer. I do a search. I find something on the admin porter. I go to write him up, and the admin porter is quick to say, well, you know what? That's great. You could write me up, but I'm going to go ahead and tell Mr. Such and Such, Mr. Hamilton, that you're harassing me. Now, sad thing is, a weak frontline person will listen to that and say, well, you know what? I do see them talking all the time together. So, of course, they're a little disenfranchised, and therefore they're like, I'm not even going to bother holding the inmate accountable, because they're just going to talk to the admin. Don't do that. If your job is to hold that inmate accountable, what I would honestly do is, I think that's definitely something where you want to call your supervisor, reach out to that admin and tell them, hey, I just caught this inmate with this, and the moment I did, he's dropping your name. At this point here, I just wanted to let you know that I'm still going to write him the charge, but he tried to utilize your name to get out of it. And then as the admin, if that's the case, what do? You fire the inmate immediately. That's why where I work, when it comes to the inmates that are the porters for the admin areas, the admin don't talk to the inmates. We talk to the custody staff and what we need done. I'll talk to the detail officer. I'll let the detail officer know, hey, do me a favor, these areas I need clean, and they delegate it out. Because I think at that point, when it comes to high levels of positions of power, you should be seen, yes, you should be approachable, but you should not, especially when you have that high level of power, be so accessible to the inmate population. But I'll go with Joe first, then Russ, and then we'll kind of alternate. But Joe, what's your thoughts on inmates that try to use positions of influence? So basically maybe your supervisor or your boss to get you to, I think in this case here, it's mostly employed for you not to do something that you should be doing within your prescribed role. What's your thought? Have you seen that game employed?
Oh yeah, more times than anybody can imagine, especially when it comes to an admin porter. And currently in my current role, when you got somebody who threatens to drop your name with a jail administrator because they feel so comfortable that they have that clout with the people, in the correctional environment, especially as a lieutenant, I've had that card pulled on me numerous times. One example, which I gave earlier, was a trustee that was a porter for the warden that we call it with a lot. When I say tobacco, I mean a lot of tobacco. And he kind of did the same thing, which, I went on ahead and placed him in segregation anyway. And of course, I called the warden that night and let him know, that I locked his inmate up. Ultimately, weeks later, he wound up getting his job back, which is fine. That's the warden's discretion, his choice, but you should never let it deter you from doing your job under a threat of having your name dropped. The end story was that the inmate knows that, he spent a good solid week in segregation behind something that, he wasn't supposed to have, even at the threat of, saying that, well, I'm going to tell the warden that you're harassing me, which, whatever, which is fine. But, I'm still locking you up. I'm still going to submit the evidence. And, you know, when it comes down to it, he'll look at it. And if he rides with you, he rides with you. And if he don't, then he don't. But, you know, whenever an inmate, especially an inmate, threatens to use his position of authority to you, especially when it comes to those who are higher up in the hierarchy than you are, don't ever let it deter you from doing your job. Do your job.
I agree with that, Joe, and that's a good story because that's what happens. Usually, when you find something, they try to use what they feel is that influence to get you to not report them, or and they always pop the word "you're harassing me," and I'm going to go ahead and tell the admin or your super, whoever they're working with, whatever, like as a porter, that you're harassing me, and we'll see where that goes. Russ, what's your thoughts, Russ? Have you seen this employed?
Oh yeah, you know, inmates are always going to try and do the end around, and you know, one of the big things is that we should be cognizant of is you know, there's not a chain of command because they're not in that chain anywhere, but there is a chain of authority that they should have access to, and that means, you know, the person, the immediate officer in their area, and no one else, and that's why it used to just chap my hide when I would have these administrators who, you know, who were trying to, put these inmates in a position where they have instant access to them through this so-called, you know, open door policy. And I would tell them all the time, I would say, that's not the way it should work. All that does is it makes an inmate chesty because they believe in that they always have an end around, and that the authority of the officer is then truncated in favor of whatever this particular administrator has going on, where they want to view themselves as being forward thinking, you know, and a real reformer or any of those things, whatever that means. So what I would do is, in my own little part, you know, as a sergeant, I would often have, you know, inmates that would approach me, and I would tell them time and time again, no, you have to have permission to talk to me. And that would stop them in their tracks. And it would also shake up and get the attention of my staff too, because they knew that I was going to back them, and that if they had a need for an inmate to come and see me, if it was something, you know, outside their pay grade or something that they didn't feel comfortable with, then they had that option to let the inmate do that. And I think it's really important because then we give the backing to the officers. They know that the final disposition lies with them. And they're also more careful to be more judicious about what it is that they're handing out to that inmate, whether it be in the form of discipline or a favor or you know, a final decision on something that's going on within that unit. And so that's what we have to do in order to be able to back our staff, and then teach them how to make the wisest of decisions, teach them how to think and act within policy and discretion, and you know, in favor of, you know, having the best possible inmate staff relations that you can have, you know, within a unit.
Yeah, because guys, when you become higher in authority, obviously the target on your back gets bigger. You have a bigger span of control. You have people that are under you, so you have to protect that authority, and you have to protect that perception of authority. So again, you know, I love, it's in my book that's coming out. You know, supervisors, when it comes to the inmate population, you should be seen. You should be approachable when, you know, if there's need for you to have that interaction, but you shouldn't be so easily accessible. I like what Russ said. When when the inmate goes to circumvent the chain of command, send them right back. Send them right back, and let the officers feel that level, or let the staff members feel that level of empowerment. That's how you got to stop that game, because the moment you open up that door, the moment they're going to keep on coming, and then all you're doing at that point is circumventing the power that is supposed to lie within that officer or that staff member on the front line. Okay, so the next one is utilizing the grievance system. Now, granted, I do believe the grievance system is a needed tool when used properly. I believe it's misused most of the time, unfortunately. I mean, literally 95% is probably misused. I'm just saying a very high number. I'm not really getting that from it, which is it's misused. But having said that, the grievance system is a good system when it's employed correctly to really find out what's going on in the prison, the jail, and then just basically it's a great system. It also documents our efforts in dealing with these matters. Granted, inmates may threaten to put you, or, well, I'm going to write a grievance to administration. If you're not doing nothing wrong, let them write it. Because if the grievance is handed over to a supervisor that's going to do their job and be fair, all that's going to happen is the supervisor is going to do their investigation and go to the inmate and say, hey, you're wrong. You're 100% wrong. Sometimes, again, it kind of falls into this, you got an inmate that's doing foolish things, and then you're a good officer and you're going to go ahead and I'm going to search this person a little bit more often. I'm not harassing them, but they know what they're doing. I'm going to go ahead and just be on top of them. And next thing you know, the inmate's like, you search me again, I'm going to write a grievance. And what they do is when they write the grievance, they don't write why you're searching their stuff. All they write is that you're harassing them because you searched the area 3 or 4 times. So again, if you're a supervisor and investigating, you talk to the officer, you talk to the staff member, and then when they tell you what's going on, if there's truth to that, then you go ahead and you tell the inmate, hey, we got your concern. This is going to be my response to your grievance. And then if you have a concern, you can always go appeal it to admin. But the good thing about that is that now when the inmate put the grievance in, what he thought would go in their favor doesn't. It now goes in our favor because we have documented a good response in regards to what they've said. Because again, it can go both ways. Inmates want to utilize the grievance system because they feel that I could document it. And then next thing you know, you guys are forced to kind of do something. It's okay, yeah, but if you're wrong, we're also going to do something correct, and our actions are also going to be documented. So sometimes what they do is they just write the complaint, however bogus it may be, and then they just want it out there because they know that when they put it out there, it's kind of like throwing everything at a dartboard, hoping to get a bullseye. Well, no, you treat it fair, you investigate it. If there's truth, obviously you got to do what you got to do. But if it's bogus, you specifically write down where what they said is in conflict with whatever the truth is or the evidence that you got, and then you slam it right back in the documentation. And next thing you know, if those grievances are ever pulled into the court system, which they could be, you got all the actions and all the evidence that conflicts, and most likely won't even make it that far then. But again, don't be scared of an inmate saying they're going to drop a grievance, because 9 times out of 10, if you're doing your job and that gets documented during the investigation of the grievance, that's going to help you a lot more than the inmate may think. What's your thoughts on that, Russ, when an inmate threatens to write you up on a grievance for doing your job?
I can't imagine any circumstances under which you should be changing anything about what you do because an inmate tells you that they're going to file a grievance on you. You should be operating the same way day in and day out with respect to policy, procedure, and being a disruptor of, the crimes that occur on a daily basis inside every correctional facility in the country. So, just be on top of your game in what you're doing, and then be aware of the things that you can do to gain the inmates back. Because, when they file something that's patently false, charge them with filing a false document. When they do something that's, silly, and they make a bunch of allegations and stuff on the document, and then because they're up on their soapbox and they feel so comfortable about saying what they are, and they forget to ask for a resolution, just grant it then. They didn't ask for a resolution, so you just write granted on that thing. At least we had that particular thing. We could deny something, we could grant it, or we could partially grant it. And these guys, a lot of times, they wouldn't even ask for a resolution. So then you could just grant it, and then it meant nothing. And especially if they had come up against their time constraints, then they don't even have time to file another grievance. So this was the kind of forward thinking that I used to like to engage in all the time. And so, to me, it's nothing. It's water off of a duck's back.
Yeah, and guys, by the way, the grievance system is usually the exhausted effort before an inmate can even think of bringing something to the court, because most likely the court should tell them, did you try handling this through the institutional route, which is usually the question, the inquiry, what's the concern? And then when you get the reply, well, I don't like that reply, then you grieve it, and then you get the chance to appeal it. Those are usually the 3 levels. Now, granted, if you're doing the investigation on the grievance and it's documented and it's pretty good as to, why the staff member is doing what they're doing, and it kind of conflicts with the inmate story, which is, obviously at that point, it's just not factual. Then when it gets to the appeal, admin will read what you wrote, which is pretty specific, and then go ahead and support what was originally decided through the investigative authority during the grievance. So again, that really does help us in the long run if it's being misused by the inmate population. What's your thoughts on this, Joe?
Yeah, I mean the grievance system ultimately, was a system put in place for to have offenders air grievances, not to use it as a manipulation tactic. All too often the offender population will use it as a bait system, especially on new officers, to get them to submit from either not doing their job to maybe going and looking at somebody else, whatever the case may be. The biggest thing, which you guys have already discussed, is documentation, especially when it comes to searches. We've all been in institutions where we had those problem children that were, what we call the writ riders and this, that, and the other, or just our problem children. That was always a disciplinary issue, that utilized the grievance procedure to, try to attack officers, try to attack their character, or whatever the case was. At least in Texas, they can't, when offenders use the grievance system, they can't request any kind of disciplinary sanctions. That's an automatic reject for any kind of disposition. But documentation is key, especially when it's an offender that's getting repeatedly searched over and over. I would tell my officers that, if you're having issues with the same offender over and over, and there's a need to search their cell due to, some sort of suspicion, call me, call my sergeant. Let us go down there. For an example, I'll never forget this guy because he's still doing it to this day, I'm sure. He was, when TDC went from smoking to non-smoking to, smoke-free institution, he was continuing to smoke. Well, the officers are working down there, and, they walk by a cell and it smells like smoke. So, intuition tells you you're going to search that cell. And it was happening on a constant basis because this guy was serving a life sentence and really didn't care. So when it started going, he grieved so much that the administration's, coming to me saying, "Hey, Pomponio, what the hell's the deal here? This guy's getting searched 4 times a week." And, at least I would ensure that, A, it was documented on a search log why we were searching this cell. And, B, a lot of the times I would make sure I initialized on the search log next to the officer. This way, when it went through the grievance procedure, I could say, yes, I'm the one that told that officer, go ahead and search that cell because, there was smoke coming from. We have more than enough probable cause to go in that cell and go look for the contraband. So it's really about documentation. It's key when you're doing your job. The more you document, the less likely and the less distance a grievance is looking to travel. In Texas, we have the 3-step system as well. First step grievance goes the administration. The administration, either approves or rejects it. If they don't like it, they can take it to a step 2, which goes to the regional office. If they approve it or reject it, then it goes to the step 3, which, is an executive director's office. But 9 times out of 10, if you document yourself correctly, you won't ever have to worry about it going past step 1. But the main thing is never let an inmate, threaten you with a grievance to not do your job. Make sure you do your job. Document it the way you have to document it, whether it's electronically or physically on paper, but document it this way. It's covering you and those around you in case something happens.
Yeah, see, for us, we have the inquiry to the department, then the grievance to the department, and then the appeal to admin. And at that point, those are the exhaustive measures in-house. And at that point, you can, if you want to get your lawyer involved. But most of the time, what they'll wind up doing is they'll write to correspondence. They'll write to the OBUDS person. So, they still get these other routes. So this one's a good one. We get this a lot. Threatening to call their lawyers, family, state representatives. Now, granted, when they make these threats, and if they do call those lawyers or family or state representatives, they actually wind up calling admin, which they, in an effort to try to put pressure on us. Now, what I don't like, and I really don't, is that when they call their lawyers, they call their family, they call their state, they don't go in making an allegation. When the lawyers call the admin, they go in and swear what was said to them is a fact without you even getting a chance to look into it. Like, they'll call up and say, your officer such and such told my client ABCD. It's like, hold on. Are you asking me to look into it, or you already know this is a fact? Because what your client says, is that 100% factual, or you want me to look into it first? So be careful when you get that phone call. You got to kind of correct them a little bit. Don't be afraid to correct them and say, listen, I'm going to look into the matter. But what I would appreciate is when you call, ask and say, hey, listen, my client called. He said this was an issue. Do you mind looking into this matter? Not a problem. Let me make some phone calls, see what happened, and if there's any concerns, we'll address it. But if there's not, we'll get back to you and we'll kind of tell you what it is that happened. Because sometimes there's always going to be a spin. A lot of them, when they get those institutional charges, they'll try to call their lawyer or their family, and they'll tell them a certain percentage or a certain perspective of what happened, but they eliminate all their responsibility towards it. And then when they call, the lawyers call like admin, they'll be like, hey, I'm going to tell you something. I know for a fact that officer such and such, ABC, you know for a fact. How do you know for a fact? Give us a chance. Let us look into the matter, and then we'll get back to you. If there's a concern, trust in our efforts to go ahead and fix that concern. I just hate when they make the phone call and they, automatically the allegation in their mind's a fact. And if you go ahead and even at that moment try to defend something that may not be honest, you become the bad person automatically. At least that's from the phone calls that come in. What's your thoughts on that, Joe, from the frontline perspective? Have you ever had an inmate threaten to call their lawyer, their family, or like a state representative on you?
Oh God, yeah, numerous times. And like I said, and like you said, for the first phone call you get, it's normally not an inquiry. It's normally an allegation. This inmate says this, and we want to know why this is happening and what's going on. Thankfully now we kind of have we have an in between called the Ombudsman's office here. It's a statewide agency that handles inquiries between the prison system and representatives' offices and lawyers and family members, that keeps them from actually calling the unit directly. Now, the state representatives, trust me, they're still going to call regardless. Mamas, they're still going to call regardless. But it's the frontline staff really doesn't see it all that much as the supervisors and your administration do, because of the fact they're the ones that normally get those calls. The officers, 9 times out of 10 don't even hear about it, because it's a matter that, we can support or back our staff by evidence and close the matter out before the officer even knows that, a state representative called. The frontline staff really doesn't need to worry about that, as long as you're doing your job within, procedures and policies, that you're documenting yourself well. For the supervisors, make sure you're backing your staff and documenting yourself and themselves well. This way, in case we do get those calls, and they will come, we have something that we can bring to the administration that they can formulate into an administrative response back to those representatives. And they can close that matter out quickly. The better you document yourself, the better it is for you, the better it is for your administration, because they're able to deal with the matter quicker instead of having to go from department to department to find out what's going on.
Yeah, and by the way, guys, documentation will always hold up later, because you can assume at any point, whatever the allegation, it could always wind itself up into the court system. Hey, Russ, what's your thoughts on the threats to call the lawyer, the family, the state representative?
All of that. Oh, I've heard all of that stuff, but it was remarkable, I think, within our system, in that we tended to ignore those people calling in and just said, okay, go ahead, file what you got to do in court or whatever. I almost never heard of, anyone ever actually fielding a call or bothering to talk to them or taking down information or looking into it. Of course, I was a little bit removed from the top, but I talked to lots of, wardens and captains and everything else, and we were just generally unconcerned because we'll respond to it if they decide to file a suit. And so maybe in California at one point, now I'm removed from it some, maybe the general feeling is that we weren't going to respond to anything they did unless it was in court. I don't know. That may be my own particular view on it. It may be right. It may be wrong. But I think that the families didn't feel like they had really much in the way of access to much of anything, because we would just shut them down. They would call in and want to check and see, if Bubba's all right, and we would just say, we can't tell you. He'll call you when he can, but we can't pass on any information at all about anything ever.
All right. So the thing is, this is when they make a call, sometimes they even have access to emails because they can email the correspondence. So inside the call or inside those emails, there could be things that could be liability. So with that said, I mean, it doesn't mean you have to follow up and call the family member back. But if the information's there and you ignore it, I mean, there could be stuff that's saying, my brother who's locked up is coughing up blood in his cell, and medical is just not responding to his needs, and they'll send you out the email. You have to react to that. There's a liability there just in case he is. But what you would do is, how we do it is we will have him seen by medical, but then you're also going to advise the person of the proper way of reaching out to medical if there is a concern. Are you not notifying the officer on the floor? I mean, we have told people that, I'm going to tell you something right now. As a lawyer, you may be going around the system when your client should be, if they really wanted immediate action, they'd be telling the officer on the floor, because at that point, the officer can move things faster than, them being able to call you, because if it was that of emergency, they're still able to call you, wait until you're able to make the phone call, whatever it is. But the issue here when it comes to the higher level side is the way it's expressed. Whatever that concern is could come through an email, or it could be a documented phone call in which there could require some action or something to be looked into immediately. But with that said, that doesn't mean I'm going to go back and call the person and let them know what the follow-up was. I just have to commit to an action, because if it's not, I do have an email that's sitting there, and if something happens to that inmate, someone is going to be able to see that email, see that it was opened, and then did not see an action on the other end of that. So again, I think the big thing here is in the response. I mean, we've had people that are trying to find out about someone's medical, and they're not even related to the inmate. So it could be a media person, it could be a news outlet. You never know. It could be someone posing as their lawyer or a family member, and it's like, okay, well, I'll still check the problem. Are you going to call me back? No, there's no reason to call you back. Your family member could do that if when they're done seeing medical, if they want to call you, but there's no reason I need to call you back. I got your concern, ma'am, or Mr. Your concern will be looked into, but at that point, have a good day. So I think for us, it's more on the follow-up, because if you don't, there's a big liability if you overlook that whatever's expressed. And trust me, these lawyers, these families, the inmates, they use very choice words. So it does commit into an action. It doesn't kind of necessarily tell you how you got to do something, but you got to commit to something. And the next one is reaching out to the media. Russ, have you heard that as a frontline professional? Has an inmate ever said, well, I got a connection to the media, and if you go ahead and do this, I'm going to go ahead and reach out to the Daily News?
Yeah, this is another one where I usually just tell them, knock yourself out. I have nothing to hide, and I think that 999 times out of 1,000, inmates overblow things, including their connections, the problem that they have. It's a matter of. I think you got to look at it this way: is that inmates, by and large, 100% just about, have these criminogenic needs, and they are these master manipulators or amateur manipulators, whatever it is, and they're going to try and do what they do in the outside world, which is take advantage of situations, and they're going to lie, cheat, and steal their way to try and get a paycheck, whether it's from a court or some kind of settlement or whatever. So, with me, I just always told them, hey, give it your best go. We'll see if you've got what it takes to take what I've got.
I agree, man. I think same thing with us with the media. What I hope, though, honestly, is when a complaint like Russ said is mentioned and it does get blown out, you do have public information officers or stuff that do their research and don't let a blown out article sit there uncontested. If there's something that's being said and it's totally out there, I believe that our PIO, our officers, should automatically be involved and challenging that story. And if the story isn't based on any facts, I think they should also, I know it sounds crazy, but they should sue the media outlet for releasing the story without, validating any of the facts. I'm tired of when you get a story that's so embellished, not true, gets out to the media and they publish it. And then when you catch all the lies and the agency goes back and says, yeah, that story's not truthful, this is the other half of that. Oh, we're sorry, we didn't know that. Okay, then don't publish it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to maybe sue you for some type of defamation or something. But either way, I think that when a story comes out and it's not credible, I think in order to maintain a good reputation, I think the PIOs should jump and form some rebuttal or challenge the media's credibility in the story that they are published. So again, for these people that reach out to the media, they can call, but you're only getting it from one source, and you're quick to publish something without truly finding out the other side of things. What's your thoughts on that, Joe, with the reaching out to the media?
Yeah, I'm kind of with Russ on that. When they threaten to write letters or do what they're going to do, as far as I'm going to contact channel so and so, hey, do whatever floats your boat, man. I really don't give a damn either way. The flip side of that is the media has a way of over embellishing things. And, one of our biggest problems right now in Texas is the air conditioning issue. A group of inmates have gotten together and filed a lawsuit and ultimately won, requiring Texas to install air conditioning. But in the meantime, the media is out there over embellishing facts. TDCJ has had 32 deaths statewide since January. They make it sound like it was heat-related deaths when in fact, 27, 28 of these guys died from natural causes or a disease like cancer or hepatitis or something like that, and maybe one or two actually died from a heat-related illness because they were outside working and they didn't take their breaks like they were supposed to and didn't drink the water that they were told to drink. I really don't let the threat of media exposure bother me. It's not something, especially frontline staff, it's not something that they should focus their attention on and worry about, is Channel 6 going to show up at my doorstep? That's just another manipulation tactic for offenders to try to manipulate you into not doing your job or getting their way.
All right, now I love that because some of the stuff that we said when it came to coercion could be frontline, could also come from top down. This one here right now, because there's 10 of them, this one here is definitely frontline, but also obviously it could also be higher up. But the reason why I'm saying that this one's more frontline is because of the frequency and contact with the inmate and frontline staff. But it could go all ways. Don't get me wrong. It could be supervisor, it could be admin. But how many times have you seen this? And we'll have Joe go first this time, and then Russ, doing favors, feelings of obligation, offers of protection. How has that been utilized to coerce staff to not do their job?
Multiple times. God, from the start of my career to damn near to the end of my career. If I had again, it's one of those where if I had a dollar or hell, even a dime for every time that this happened to me, hell, I could have retired 10 years ago. It's something that the staff need to be extra mindful of. And it's not just frontline staff. Hell, your administrative staff need to be mindful of it. I've seen ward secretaries fall for it. I've seen, unit supply clerks fall for it. I've seen food service people fall for it. Never let a convict do a favor for you. Never put yourself in a position where you're obligated to that convict. Never, ever, man. As long as you're doing your job, you're doing what you're supposed to do. This should never be a factor, and you should never let it be a factor.
Hey, Russ, what's your thoughts? I know you've seen it, right? Especially with those porters, huh?
Yeah, especially with the porters. This is usually not something where you see the coercion angle so much as just your typical kind of quid pro quo. I do for you, so you do for me, and that's just part of the transactional nature of being a human being. The problem is it doesn't translate over well into a correctional setting. We don't want that inside the correctional setting, because ultimately then it's corrosive to the safety and security of the unit. So, the idea that you can be obligated because you have a clerk that's doing a really good job for you. Well, great. There's limits. There's limits to that, though, and clerks, by and large, they do get a little bit extra, as it were, for some of the things they do. But you have to watch yourself as a human being and not feel like there's some extraordinary obligation that's going to do something that is corrosive to the safety and security of anything that goes on in that unit. So those are the things that I have to say about that. It's mostly, though, that quid pro quo idea, and just the way that people are transactional animals. That's the way it is. So you just have to cut that out of your part of your interactions with your inmates. Be as transactional as they are, but don't give them any extra play in it. That what they've earned, they get to keep. That's it.
Yeah, and guys, this is in my manipulation book. It's also in the new book I have coming out. That feeling of obligation, inmates know, could be an overwhelming feeling. So, an inmate will come up and say, hey, I'll do you this solid, especially sometimes those porters. And sometimes they become so good at their job that, we wind up become relying on them. And when they get in trouble, it's like, oh, no, I need them. They're the best at plumber. Of course, that's their game. And then also when you keep on reminding them and praising them that they're the best, well, then they know it's like, okay, I can play this person, and next thing you know, you're taking the inmate out of lock to fix something where technically it's like, I just got to spend time and train another inmate to do the job. I mean, that's the key. Put the work and effort back into someone new. Don't allow the inmate to manipulate their position or their usefulness. Let's just do it that way. Their usefulness and having you get feeling obligated. So when you go to write them up, the inmate will be quick to say, hey, I cleaned your office and made you look good for that sergeant, or, I protect you in this unit. Don't think I don't protect you. I protect you because these inmates here, they don't like you, but I protect you. And it's like, I don't need your protection. At the end of the day, I got my radio here. Hey, and I got Russ and Joe coming down the wing. What the hell do I need you for? And they come because not only it's just their job, but we're family. They don't come in an expectation that I owe them. So again, guys, I like what Russ said, really good with that transactional. It's not a transactional relationship you have with the inmate. They do their job. If they don't, they don't. And there's no favors. I tell you to do this. Oh, only for you. No, you're doing it because I told you to. You're not shifting this, because even when they say only for you, or I'll do you the favor, who has the power at that moment? They do. That's when you respond back and say, it's not a favor. I gave you an order, and if you're not going to do it, then I'll just find somebody else who will. Russ, I know this one will hit home at you, Russ, because I know what happens. I assume this happens. Could happen when people are new, but definitely when people are very timid and hesitant in their position of authority. But threats or intimidation, what's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Okay, so yeah, when you're working these units, and especially the ones that are more active, or especially that have that STG presence, because that STG presence really rubs off on every single inmate in there. And everyone's running around, chest out, ready to fight. Even if not much fighting is actually going on, threats and intimidation kind of become their bread and butter, and they're used to doing it with other inmates. And you know what? There's very little that stops these guys because they don't have any boundaries to begin with. And they're going to put that on you, and sometimes things happen. I've been involved in incidents where I've been, green lighted to be hit and things like that. And, or they'll just face to face even, they'll tell you, hey, you know what, I'm going to kick your ass, or I'm going to find you and stab you, or something like that. And you have to be prepared to deal with that. And the time to deal with it is then and there and right now, every single time this happens. This is not something that, waits for a sit down chat later on so we can iron things out, because that's not what's going on. And this is one of the things that, that person has to be locked up immediately. They present a clear and present danger at that moment in time and ongoing if you don't address it right then and there.
I agree. And Joe, what's your thoughts? Does that happen to you in your career?
Oh yeah, definitely. Especially amongst the STG communities. When you start enforcing rules and regulations, and it starts spilling over into the STG cliques, and you start messing up their little gang they got going on. Yeah. Sometimes doing the right thing is not the easiest thing, nor is it the less painful thing. But nevertheless, you got to stand your ground and make it known that regardless of threat or intimidation, you're still going to do your job. I've been beat down, I've been stabbed, but the end result was still my end result, not theirs. So, they know, once it's said and done, that you're not going to back down. And, when it comes to something like that, you should always stand your ground regardless, especially if it's the right thing. Especially if it's something that could present a danger to you, to another offender, or to, one of your staff members. Never, ever not do your job because of threat or intimidation. If it comes to something like that, that's what you have a radio for. You have a telephone. Say, hey, this is Officer Gangi. Need a supervisor to my wing. Got an inmate who's threatened physical harm to a staff member, and trust me, we will deal with it. Definitely.
Yeah, and I want to mention something here with this one, guys. This really isn't about the size of the individual. They're looking for an easy target. At the end of the day, when they intimidate you or they make a threat, they're looking at someone that has a weak heart. Because I've seen people that are small in stature and they won't fuck with that individual, because the individual has heart, and they're going to reinforce whatever it has to be done. So this isn't really a physical thing. It's more of, do you have heart, or are you going to stand behind your authority? And at that point, it doesn't matter what the size is. They're just looking for something. The inmates are looking for someone who's weak in heart. So I agree with Russ. I agree with you, Joe. I mean, this is really just, you got a position of authority, get ready to utilize it when needed and back it up, and when we back it up, it's the presence. I mean, that's what it is. It's the presence. So be wary of that, because if you're weak or hesitant in that role of authority, I think that's definitely something where they'll be like, okay, they'll try to push on you and intimidate you, and then eventually you wind up just being weak. And be honest with you guys, in corrections, authority can't come out. There it is. Your fucking dog's got authority.
He does have authority. I taught him that.
Good timing there. All right, let's get the next one. All right, so Joe. Okay, so Joe, you'll go first on this one. Yeah, that was good timing. We've all dealt with feelings of guilt where an inmate does something foolish, you charge them, and then what happens here is the inmate makes you feel guilty for writing them up. So an example is, I catch an inmate doing something foolish, I write him up, and like, well, if you write me up, I won't be able to go to visits this weekend. Okay, well, whose fault is that? That's not my fault. My job is to hold you accountable. So whose fault is it really that you're not going to visit? So you're going to call your family and tell your family it's my fault that you couldn't go to visit because I caught you doing A, B, C, and D. My job is to catch you doing A, B, C, and D and hold you accountable. So feelings of guilt is usually utilized when you have a staff have a responsibility to holding an inmate accountable, and then they'll go ahead and make you feel guilty for carrying that out. In this case here, the consequence of the inmate not getting their visits if you write them up and send them the lock. I'm sure you've seen this, Joe, feelings of guilt, and it works sometimes, guys. It works.
Yeah, unfortunately, it does. Not necessarily, along the lines of, hey, if you write me up, I'm not going to be able to get my visit this weekend. That they'll reach back in the old playbook and try to pull some out. Hey, my baby's sick at home. My wife just left me. My mother is not doing well, and I've had a bad day. I've got some bad news, and that kind of mess. Regardless, the convict knows what the rules and regulations are. Prior to the sickness or prior to whatever. Say they know what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do. So never ever let a convict pressure you into feeling guilty because you wrote them up for something that was against the rules and regulations. In grand scheme of things, they're still a convict. You're still a staff member. Their job is to try to get away with it, and our job is to catch them.
And that's spot on. And Russ, in your career, have you seen feelings of guilt and wind up maybe some staff falling victim to that?
Certainly. I mean, day in and day out, you have, lots of interactions with the inmate, the inmate population as a whole. You get to know them on, probably a deeper level than what happens, out there at the patrol level of things, where you're just, encountering random strangers and so forth. I encounter it now more than ever before because of what I do as a case manager. Where I'm in there and developing an ongoing rapport with these offenders, and sometimes they get to the point where it's like, oh, if you report me for that dirty test, they're going to arrest me. And what's really the biggest kindness that you can do for an individual like that? It's have them held accountable for their actions so that they learn something, so down the road they can actually stay out. Now, does that mean that they end up getting a 10-day flash and spend 10 days in jail? Yeah. Does it mean that prison sentence that they have hanging over them, might get executed and they might end up doing, 6 or 7 years? Yeah, that's a likelihood. I just had one that I know of that, he was doing great, and then he ended up, getting busted for drunk driving, and now he's looking at 11 years because they had suspended his prior sentence. So, the idea of them pushing the immediacy of the action that they did off on you as guilt, instead of acknowledging all the things that they did in the past and the bad choices that they made to get to that point, doesn't hold water. And you should be thinking about that in that larger perspective, not the closer interactions that you've had over a period of time with that inmate. You have to be a big picture thinking in all the things that you do, including what that inmate did to get them there.
Yeah, and guys, when utilizing discretion, you have to realize something. When inmate is able to win that game with you when it comes to guilt, that is a sign of weakness, because again, that's testing your authority and you not being able to enforce it. So again, you got to be very. Go ahead, Russ.
I was going to say, being weak is not being kind.
Yeah,
it's not. We may not be doing this from the perspective that I often do it from now, which is very different than what I've done before. We're actually trying to help that individual, but help is not necessarily kindness. Helping them is having them learn to deal with their past, their present, and their future. And so the idea that, okay, well, I screwed up and now I just want someone to cut me some slack one more time. Well, this one more time may seem small in the grand scheme of things, but in the larger scheme of things, it's this time, and then it's also the next time and the time after that. And at some point, all of that's going to end up backfiring on them and maybe backfiring on you too. So, we have a standard of rules and things that we expect, and we want to hold people to a level of accountability that actually helps them out. Don't be kind. Yeah. That's not what it's about. Quit being kind and start, actually doing something that helps them, because kindness does not help them.
It's funny. I believe that you have that quote in my upcoming book with the being kind. What is it? You just said it. Being kind is.
Yeah, I wish I remembered it exactly, but yeah, it's in there.
I think it's in the book, and I also have that holding people accountable is a good way to help them, because when you hold people accountable, you're also telling them that you see a greater potential in them to some extent, right? You made a bad choice. Yeah, you could do better. Here's what you're going to do today now.
I mean, it's up to them if they want to find a way to work their way out of the life that they built for themselves. I'm all about that, and I've helped so many of them do that. But in the end, a lot of people that are in my current line of work, they fall for that though, because they just have this thing where they think that doing them this little kindness is going to be helpful, and it's not.
Yeah, and guys, people didn't know this. When Russ came into corrections in CDCR in 1989, he came in and said, "I'm going to change everyone's life in here." That's what I'm for. I'm going to change each and every one. All right, now you're going to see this next one more with juveniles. I dealt with a few. I know Russ has, and we'll go with Russ first. But I just want to mention the induced exhaustion or persistence. This is coercion by convenience, and what I mean by that is sometimes inmates are so annoying and just so persistent that if you tell them a no, they're just not going to leave you alone. So then some people, just to be convenient, either avoid the inmate, or when the inmate comes up, they're like, let's just do it this one time. And to me, this induced exhaustion persistence also, out of convenience, opens up the Pandora's box, because now you did it for this guy, you got to do them for more. But juveniles, Russ, would you agree? It's like they keep on coming and.
Oh, they do, and it's kind of that thing that you see on different sitcoms or something, where the little boy is saying, please, 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 and you know what? They have the wherewithal to wear you down. That's the point, though, at which you step in and say, no, in fact, we're not even going to discuss that. Now we are going to discuss. We're going to discuss the disciplinary measures for you not following my order, which is to leave us alone on this subject. You can't just repeatedly go in there and give them the same answer over and over again and think that you're going to make some kind of headway with that. And so this is just the kind of thing, though, that that's kind of like the extreme look at it. But you know what, over time, just interacting with them, on a yard or whatever, they'll do lots of little things. And in the end, you just cave by giving them, what they want. Maybe they're, it's some property they want back that was taken. Maybe it's, they want, an extra tray for helping, which they should have been doing anyway, because it's their assigned job in the mess hall. And then, over time, they will just, keep asking and asking and asking. And it may not be all right in a row. It might just be day after day after day after day. And you have to be able to figure out where it is that you draw the line. And the sooner you draw the line and the more deep and wide you make that line, the better off you're going to be, because there's a lot of other things that you need to tend to than their shallow emotional whims.
Yeah, and guys, this is more short-term versus long-term. I think the persistence is an effort to kind of get you to fold in the short term, but you have to stay focused in the long term. If I cave in now, this is what's going to happen down the line. So you got to just, be just as stubborn and persistent on your end. That's the key. Match it. And remember, think longer term, because I've seen people just say, I just don't want to be bothered with this today. No, be bothered. Don't give in, because once you open up that door, guys, it's very hard to close it. You seen that, Joe?
Yeah, and I agree with Russ 100%. I think your immediate answer should dig a huge damn trench in the ground that they can't cross. My thing was to stop persistence is to have a definite and immediate reaction. Be firm in definite in your no to them, to eliminate any kind of persistence. And if they're persistent after your immediate and definite answer, then you start stepping up your game a little bit with them to derail their persistence. Even if it means a disciplinary sanction. Look, we've crossed this bridge once. I told you not no, but hell no. It's not going to happen. And if you ask me again, I'm going to charge you with, trying to overrule authority. And usually that knocks that in the head. But yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it happen where they just totally will wear somebody down. The Bart Simpson syndrome is what we used to call it. But, it's definitely a tactic they will use. And I've seen it go in the offender's way, and I've seen it go with the staff's way. So
the ow, quit it. Ow.
Yeah, ow, quit it. Ow, quit it. Ow, quit it. Yeah.
The Simpsons. The next one I have is isolation. I mean, we've seen this happen where the inmate tries to get staff away from any type of counter influence. Basically, trying to get the staff member to talk in confidence and just being able to eliminate their influence with other staff members. And therefore, for me, there's never been anything in confidence between me and an inmate. And I made it known to them that whatever you tell me, if there's an action I have to commit to, I'm going to go ahead and follow it up. There's no secrets between you and an inmate. So the isolation thing, that's just something that you got to let the inmates know right off the bat that you're connected to your peers. Right off the bat, you got to make them see that, whether it's through your actions or they say something. Let me just call my supervisor, get their insight on this. But isolation is definitely something, because if they could pull you away from any influence that will take you in the right direction, that will start messing with your mind and start taking you down the wrong path. What's your thoughts on that? I'll have Joe go first and Russ, but obviously isolation is usually what leads to an inmate being able to get personal with you, taking you out of your prescribed role, kind of connecting you more to them than your staff, and takes you a whole road, us versus them, all this other stuff. It starts the moment they isolate you and they pull you out of that prescribed role, kind of like a cult-like fashion, if you will. Let me isolate you from counter influence so I can go ahead and, get my footprint in there. What's your thoughts on that, Joe?
Yeah, isolation is definitely a form of weakness in the individual. That's what leads to the we them and you us syndrome. And you should never ever allow yourself to be isolated from your staff. I don't care what level or branch that you're at, from frontline all the way up to administration. You should never, ever let yourself be isolated by a convict. That's a recipe for disaster, not just for you, but for the possibility of your staff, as well. Definitely. If an inmate is able to isolate you, that means he has been watching you from the get-go and playing that game and looking for your weaknesses. And I tell you, if he's able to isolate you, his ass has found it.
Yeah, and by the way, guys, when an inmate looks to manipulate, they look at the person, but they also look at the environment. So if you're, not connected to your peers, or you're at a satellite post, whatever it is, Russ got it. What's your thoughts, Russ, on this isolation?
It's easier for an inmate to isolate a staff member if maybe they're on some kind of work crew where that individual is supervising them. If they're not often in the presence of other staff, if they are young or new to the profession, those are the kind of potential weaknesses that they would look to exploit. And so, we should always be on the lookout for, inmates that are trying to do that. And, there's lots of ways that they can do it. But it's that distance from other staff and the influence of them and the good practices, hopefully, that other staff are showing, and the progression of bringing that individual, especially if they are young or new, from that, that beginning apprentice stage, more toward the journeyman level. We want that to happen in a way that they become hardened and inured to the influence that an inmate would have over them. That's why I think you have to be careful in who you assign to some of these positions. But you just look at the way they do it. They'll go out there, people talk. That's what people do. And, the inmate has plenty of time to tell this particular individual all kinds of things, like about how, I don't think the other officer Smith, I don't think he likes me, because sometimes he comes in there and he'll tear up my stuff. And, all of this stuff is designed to, get some feedback from the officer to, kind of agree. Well, yeah, that's kind of messed up. I would never do you that way. So what does that inmate accomplish? Maybe not something personally for that inmate, but if you can get that officer to lay down and lay back on some of the duties that they have to pull off, the way that they conduct their searches, for instance, it's a win-win situation. So that's why we have to be careful with isolation, because it provides a fulcrum, if you will, for being able to leverage that officer into positions that he never intended to be in.
Yep. And I got one more to wrap us up. It's monopolizing of perception and shift perspectives and loyalty. I just want to, so for me, I know what's expected of me because basically the oath that I provide, but I also hold myself to those standards internally. I am all about doing the right thing. And for me, the right thing is what the agency expects of me. Again, that's where that trusted relationship is. I am very connected to my integrity, my morals, and that aligns with what the job and what my peers also expect of me. Granted, when it comes to monopolizing of perception, when you don't have that internalized, what I just said, and you kind of do what's right or wrong based on the fact that you don't want to lose your job or you don't want to go to jail, more of this external incentives, inmates are able to go ahead and minimize consequences or minimize what you view as right or wrong, even if something as a simple favor, like, oh, it's just a phone call. It's not that big of a deal. Can you call my person on the streets? When you know what's right or wrong inside and it's internal, you don't leave it based to external circumstances, then you don't shift. Like I'm doing the right thing, not because if I do the wrong thing, I'm going to go to jail, or not because if I do the wrong thing, I'm going to lose my family or I'm going to lose my job. I'm doing the right thing because I want to do the right thing. That's in me. Can't shift that because that's my foundation. I'm not leaving it out there for anybody to get a hold of that. And when it comes to shift perspectives and loyalty, when an inmate goes to pull you out of your prescribed role and they start to make those little those little requests that are just kind of outside of way outside of what you're supposed to be doing. Remember, they're going to try to build a trust with you. And then how they do that is by saying like, oh, don't worry, I won't report you, or I won't tell on you. And all of a sudden, those external consequences of you losing your job, none of that matters anymore because you built the trust with this inmate. So, well, this inmate's not going to tell. They're not like everyone else. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. No, you're a fool. You're a fool. Because at the end of the day, when you went and took this job, you made a promise to the agency. You don't work for the inmate. You work for the agency. You work to help your peers. I mean, at the end of the day, for me, when it comes to monopolizing a perception, it's usually related to where your loyalty lies. And if you leave that based on external reasons, like I'm only loyal to the job because I don't want to go to jail if I messed up, or I'm only loyal to the job because I don't want to, I need money. I'm only loyal to the job because I need money. Well, if I'm an inmate and I'm able to build a trust with you and I tell you, hey, I'm not going to tell on you, so therefore don't worry, you won't get arrested and you won't lose your job, then what the fuck is holding you? Nothing. But if you go in and say, well, I'm loyal to these aspects of myself. I took this job because at the end of the day, I'm committed to what's right. I made a promise amongst my peers. I made a promise amongst myself. I made a promise to the agency. I made a promise to my community. And if an inmate comes up and says, hey, I need you to do this, no. Why? Because it's no, because I said it. There's no promise that you can make that's going to minimize my accountability to what is expected of me. Russ, what's your thoughts on this monopolizing of perception, shift perspectives, and loyalties?
So I think I kind of have a little bit of a unique perspective on this now because of the way my role has changed. One of the things that I think some people that are in roles like I'm in now, and I know this is going to make some people mad out there, but the idea of them doing good, the do-gooders, as I call them, I don't mind doing good per se, but when their focus is on service to the inmate rather than service to the community, service to their oath, service to the facility, service to the hiring authority, that's the point at which they open themselves up to being coerced or manipulated, or someone, getting that foot in the door to co-opt or corrupt them, right? You know what? I enjoy very much, and I take pride in the fact that I've, helped rehabilitate numerous individuals, that I've helped them become more successful. But I'm doing that for society's benefit, the community's benefit, and for the entity that I work for, and all of that. And that's where my focus has to be. So when my focus is on those things, because I still consider myself to have taken that oath never got broken just by virtue of the fact that that I ended up retiring. I know that I can't be moved off of those things that are important to me because I take my duty so seriously. And my duty is not, of course, they're not, well, I guess in my case, they're both inmates and probationers. My duty is not to them. My duty is first to society. And so if you look at it from that perspective, you'll stay much safer than if you go Tony Smith or Davy Brown or whoever they are on an individual basis. No, you're not helping them on an individual basis. You're helping them as participants in the system that you're in. You're mute.
Damn it.
You're mute.
Yeah,
I got you. I got you.
Got me. In the book I have coming out, there's a part in the book that says you don't work for the inmate, you work for the agency. Don't eliminate the middleman.
I think I'm in that part too.
Yeah, that's one of yours. I think that's. We got the passage, but I think you have the quote above. But that's the truth. At the end of the day, I remember a story real quick where there was a social worker, and the inmate wanted the social worker to call the IRS, and the social worker was like, "It's not my job to do that. That's between you and whatever you're outside, whatever. It's not. I'm not doing it. It's not part of my function." And the inmate actually turned to her and said, you work for me. This is how entitled some of these inmates are. And she turned around, she goes, no, I work for the agency. And unless they're telling me to do it, it's not happening. And I was like, yeah. And I went back. First of all, I loved what she did. And I said, I loved it because I said, you don't eliminate the middleman. That inmate tried to, I guess you want to say, shift her perspective by eliminating the agency and saying, you work for me. And she went back and said, no, I work for the agency. Hey, what's your thoughts on this, Joe, that monopolizing the perspective, shifting that loyalty?
Well, the first thing, like you said, you have to be loyal to yourself first. You have to be loyal to your principles. You have to be loyal to your integrity, your perseverance, your commitment. You have to be loyal to yourself before, you can be loyal to any agency. You're not going to do them any good if you're not loyal to your principles, and not being loyal to what you do, who you work with, what your functions are. You're basically a walking manipulation tactic waiting to happen. You should always be loyal to yourself. You should always be loyal to those above you and especially those below you. As a supervisor, I always kind of told myself I really could care less about what the uppers do because that's above my pay grade. That's in their realm. I said, but what you guys do is in my realm. You're my responsibility. So you should definitely be loyal to your people. Especially in the supervisory field, not having any kind of integrity going into this profession is a recipe for disaster. You're not going to do yourself any good. You're not going to do your coworkers any good, and you're damn sure not going to do your subordinates any good. In that instance, the inmate's going to win.
Yeah, and guys, this is really, I think this last tip or the last thing we just mentioned is something you got to be wary of. I said a story a while ago before we get to our closing thoughts that I want to share with you that I think matters. Let's just do it this way. I'll just say the story. I'm not going to say where I got it from. Let's just say the story. But there was an officer who, came into corrections, worked at the female facility, and would constantly remind himself every day, remind others that no woman is worth losing his job over, all this other stuff. Very externally driven. I'm not going to lose my job. I'm not going to go to jail. I'm not going to lose my family, all this other stuff. He starts making a rapport or a connection with an inmate, and I think the inmate starts to kind of build a trust with him to the point where she's able to remove those consequences. So now it's not so much about losing his job anymore because she said, hey, I'm not going to say anything. So therefore that's no longer on the table. And then that person's mind starts to shift from, I'm not saying I'm going to do anything foolish, but if I did, these are areas where I could do it, where I wouldn't get caught. And it's like, well, where the hell did that come from? Like, why are you thinking of that? Well, if I wanted to do something with an inmate, I'm not saying I would, but I could probably get away with it if I did it in these areas here. It's like, why is that even on your mind? Like, I'm just asking you, why is that on your mind? Like, I mean, now all of a sudden the mind starts to shift. Now the person has pulled away the consequences because now there's some level of trust. And now in your head, you're thinking of ways to go ahead and whatever it is that you're trying to do with this female inmate. So there's a slight shift, So again, when you live by these external consequences, it's just not enough if an inmate is able to build a rapport, build trust, and then go ahead and say, well, if those consequences didn't exist, what's holding you now? That's why it's good to kind of have that internal being, because if I'm connected to what's right, because it's what's right, doesn't matter of those consequences, because that's not why I'm doing it. I don't need those consequences to reinforce the right thing to do. That's the I used to hate it when people say, well, I'm not going to lose my job over it. Is that why you're not doing it? I mean, is that why you're not being foolish? I mean, it sounds like to me, you're just trying to justify not doing it. Makes sense, right? You're just trying right now to keep going in your mind, justifying not doing it. All right. So as closing thoughts, what do you got, Russ? What do we got?
I was really struck by what you just said there, actually, about, those externalized reasons and saying, I wouldn't want to do this because I wouldn't want to jeopardize my job. Well, how about not wanting to jeopardize losing your way? I think that's the real thing. If you're in this job, you really need an internal reason to stay with it. And that has to be some kind of pride that comes from your oath, from your philosophy, from the values that you hold dear. And you have to have some type of, North Star in your life, something to point you toward that you never veer from. And if you don't have that, you need to start making sure that you find it. Otherwise, you can lose your way in a lot of different ways here. And it's not just about maybe being corrupted by an inmate. It might be the other way around. You might end up doing something foolish with regards to a use of force or something like that. So stay true to your principles, but know what your principles are.
Yep. I agree. And Joe, what's your thoughts? Anything for closing?
Yeah, I kind of echo with the same thing that Russ just said. You got to be true to yourself, be true to your principles, and be true to those around you. Don't leave yourself open to any kind of interpretation by anybody or any kind of manipulation by anybody. In this profession, it's real easy to lose your way. Like Russ said, in a lot of ways, it's not necessarily being manipulated into a tactic, into cross the line with an offender. I mean, it could be a use of force. It can be anything. Let the buck stop with you. If an MA knows he's not going to get through you, he's damn sure not going to try to go around you, because chances are the rest of your staff are in the same boat. So, make it clear to yourself, make it clear to them, make it clear to the offender population that you're non-wavering in your principles, and let them know exactly where your loyalty lies. Be upfront about it. I mean, I've always told the, academies as they come in, regardless of the racial makeup of this class, there's only two colors in this penitentiary: gray and white. That's it. And it kind of shocks them a little bit, but it towards the end of the academy, it makes sense to them. We are all that we have, and we will not let one go down, not without a fight anyway.
Yeah, and guys, real quick, just my closing thought is: remember, coercion is about power and control, but it's also about your willingness to give up that control. Don't forget about that. I mean, coercion is like manipulation. It only happens if you allow it to happen. So granted, protect your role, protect your authority. Don't be so willing to give that up, because the moment you do, who knows where you're going to be. You're definitely not going to have a career. I'll tell you that. You'll be lucky if you don't go to jail, or you'll be lucky you don't get somebody hurt, or you yourself will be lucky that you don't get hurt. So at the end of the day, guys, there's good 10 tips. Hopefully you could apply them in your career. And as always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.